Joining us now, Senator Mark Warner. Senator, good to have you, man.
Hey, John, good to be on.
Let's start with national security, and let's get to the massacre at Brussels. A lot of people saying that to start with, that's a rat hole there. There was just not a lot of security going on ahead of time. You've worked diligently on encryption and digital security. You come from that business sort of originally in the tech field. A lot of things in Brussels, Senator, fell through the cracks. People are concerned. Could the same thing happen to us here in the United States? Can you give us an update on that?
Well, let me take them in sequential order. I was actually in Paris on a trip the day that Brussels took place, and you could feel it, the kind of unease all through the streets that day. And the challenge is that the European security services, both their police forces, their equivalent of the FBI and CIA, they don't talk to each other. And what my great fear is, you've got all these countries with open borders between them. You've got Turkey that has not done a good job of staunching the flow of refugees until recently with the new accord. But what we've seen is, is until a country gets attacked in a serious way, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to take the need to have its security forces actually communicate with each other. Let's face it, in the United States, we didn't take it appropriately seriously enough until 9/11. The British didn't take it until their subway bombings and tube bombings and 7/7. The French have religion or have more focus now as well after Charlie Hebdo and the circumstances with the earlier attacks. You're right. The Belgians did an awful job of letting things fall through the cracks, and increasingly I worry about the Germans and other nations as well that don't have appropriate information sharing. That's number one, and they've got to. It would be like Virginia not talking to Maryland and not talking to North Carolina, and in Virginia we would have our own FBI, CIA, as well as local police. They've got to do a better job of communicating, number one. Number two, on encryption. Encryption is here to stay. I've spent months and months on this, long before the Apple Apple FBI case came up, and this issue around encryption is only going to get more complicated because, as many of your listeners may know, we're about to move into what's called the Internet of Things, where your refrigerator and your car and everything else has sensors and cameras on it, and it's going to raise a host of other questions. My concern was that both the FBI and Apple became absolutist positions. They went to each other's corner. They didn't talk to each other. And the facts proved that both of them were not telling, I believe, the full story. So what we proposed, and I've done this with the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, a Republican member from Texas who was a longtime prosecutor. I've got the tech background. He's got the prosecutorial background. We said, let's put a commission together because it is so complicated. If we don't get a common set of facts, we're going to get this wrong. Usually commissions are punts, but this is a case where if we legislate this incorrectly, we can make Americans less safe. Our commission approach has been endorsed by both the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. You never get those two papers to agree on everything. We've got the National Sheriff's Association, many members of the intel community, tech and others. Because my fear is if we do an American-only solution, which some have proposed, with over half of the applications that are being added to the App Store every day, there's over 2,000 apps added every day. Over half of them are foreign-based. What I don't want to do is say we've legislated something and then have criminals and terrorists just move to foreign-based hardware and software because those phones would not be covered by American legislation. That software that you could import down from the cloud, American jurisdiction wouldn't be over it. It's going to take a much more comprehensive approach, frankly, a more worldwide approach around this encryption issue to get it right.
Okay, but Senator,
this is a very complicated. Both of them are very complicated and important subjects.
That's also a very lofty task. I mean, getting an international policy in place is not going to be easy to do.
Well, I don't think.
Right?
John, I don't think we can necessarily get a full international policy. I do think that within America, and what we talked about is having tech law enforcement, intel, privacy, force them into the room so that then it is Congress's job to get this right. But I tell you, as somebody who's got 20 years background in this field, it is extraordinarily complicated. The networks today are different than they were in the 90s. And my fear is if we don't get a common set of facts, and the model we've tried to set up is the 9/11 Commission, where you could get those common set of facts, and then Congress can make its choices. Because I'm just pointing out that this debate is also happening in France and Britain. There's other similar coordination, or it's going to be like whack-a-mole. The criminals and the terrorists will just move to software and hardware that is foreign-based.
Senator Warner, how do you protect those that feel or respond to those that feel that moving down this path is another way of stripping away privacy and liberty?
Well, first of all, I start with one premise. Encryption makes us stronger. Encryption protects our databases. It protects our privacy, our personal information. This is not a pro-encryption, anti-encryption argument. In many ways, it is an argument about whether you put a back door in and mandate a back door, which I think, frankly, makes American systems more vulnerable. I think that is why you've got to have advocates around for civil liberties part of this group. There are equities to be weighed here. We're not going to have a perfect solution set, and that's why we call this not an encryption commission but a digital security commission. Because if you think these are challenging questions, wait till you get to the fact that within 5 years your car, your vacuum cleaner, your refrigerator are all going to have cameras and sensors on it, and that opens up a whole nother realm of privacy-related issues that will, frankly, even make the encryption issue look, in certain ways, small in comparison.
Let's get to the Ukraine. I know you were over there during the congressional recess. We just had a regime change there, so to speak. Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk announced his long-expected resignation. Look, the West got involved in toppling the other prime minister. Europe got involved in it. The U.S. got involved in it. Now it's a disaster. So, two questions. Give us an update on what's happening there, and why area, Senator, where we have the United States does not have any strategic interest. Every time we get involved in this stuff, we just muck it up.
Well, John, listen, we met with Ukrainian military leaders, others, and there were clearly Russian forces or Russian-supported forces in the eastern part of the country. Remember how this came about? The people of Ukraine rose up against a corrupt government, and they wanted to participate with Europe in a closer economic union. And I think that has been they are not a member of NATO. NATO did expand to include the Baltic state, Poland. I think the Europeans definitely thought that Ukraine leaning into Europe was something that would be in all of the West's interest. But what we then saw was Putin take very aggressive actions. I continue to support the sanctions against Putin, but I've also been very disappointed with the Ukrainian government, which has not done a good job of cleaning its own house. It is hard to, the level of corruption that still remains in the Ukrainian regime is a real challenge.
So, Senator Warner, I get back to my original question that I had when this whole thing started. What is the United States' strategic interest in the Ukraine?
I believe the United States' strategic interest is in promoting spread of free market, spread of democracy. The Ukrainian people stepped up and said they wanted to be closer part of Europe. And I think having more countries aligned with more pro-Western policies is in the United States' interest. Now, does that interest mean that it? I do think, John, you raise a good point that when these kind of internal revolts take place or an internal revolution, how far down the path does that go in terms of American or Western support? Because I think your critique that sometimes Europe advocates for these things, but then Europe doesn't have the will, the firepower, or the resources to really, support its own goals, and we get left sometimes bearing a disproportionate burden is a fair critique.
Well, look, you look at the German situation. They were involved in this. They're buying natural gas from Russia. The Ukrainian situation has a lot more to do with Germany than the United States. Yet, on the other hand, Merkel is not even carrying her weight with NATO. So it's like, the average person, Senator, looks at this and says, look, America's getting screwed on all ends.
I think you've seen the French start to step up. You've seen the British step up. Clearly, what has frustrated me as well is, we see these aggressive actions by Putin. America takes the leadership on putting sanctions in place, and then the Europeans question whether the sanctions should still be there. I also absolutely believe that it is critical that these European nations do their 2% of their budget on defense. They cannot completely rely upon Americans only. I do see when we also visited Poland, Poland is doing its 2% and very much feels the threat. The question though is, under that view, and I know, John, some of folks here supporting, but I do believe NATO is critically important to America's long-term national security. And when you form these alliances, you've got to honor these alliances.
Right. I mean, I think we should honor them, but I also think that everybody has to be accountable to it. And the fact that there's 23 nations involved in it and the United States is paying 89% of the freight, I mean, that just doesn't seem equitable to many people, Senator.
It's not. And the Europeans, one of the things that, I go back to the threat around terrorism. Unfortunately, it's taken incidents in England and France to get those countries to set up in a more forceful way a response against potential terrorism. My fear is that it will take those kind of incidents in each country before each of those countries do the kind of information sharing and common front against terrorism and against other extremist forces that we need.
All right, Senator, let's get to Merrick Garland opening on the Supreme Court. Obviously, your colleagues on the Republican side saying we're not going to consider anything. There will be no hearings, and that's that. But some Republicans are meeting with Justice Garland. How do you see this playing out, sir?
Well, John, I think some of my Republican colleagues are setting a very dangerous precedent. Overwhelmingly, people who have called in to my office to say, give this guy a hearing, and they may not like him, then vote against him. But to not even offer a hearing, and there is no historical precedent. Yes, there have been times in the fall when Democrats said, if there's a potential resignation, they should wait until after an election. But that was very different than a death on the Supreme Court that took place this early in the year. And I just think, the Constitution is clear. The president nominates and the Senate advises and consents. And I am very, very disappointed. I hope a number of my Republican colleagues will go ahead and change their mind, offer a hearing. And if they want to vote against Judge Garland, that's their right. If they reach the conclusion he's not suited to be on the Supreme Court, but do your job. I'm going to meet with Judge Garland today. I've been impressed by what I've read about him. I'm going to reserve, my final judgment until I, get a chance to meet with him and hopefully see what happens coming out of hearings. But you can't arbitrarily choose when to adhere to the Constitution or not. And I just think we are on both constitutional, political, and every other ground in very dangerous territory with the actions of these Republican senators. And frankly, the idea that, Senator McConnell said before Justice Scalia was dead more than an hour that they ruled out moving forward, I mean, it's pretty unprecedented.
It is, but I think their argument is why not let the American people decide? We've got a presidential campaign coming up.
The American people did decide. They reelected President Obama for a 4-year term, not for a 3-year term. I mean, I have enormous respect for your views and how strongly held they are, but you are traditionally a pretty strict constructionalist. This idea of let the people decide. Well, in that case, why should the senator, any senator who's up this year, vote on any issue as well? There's no logic in this. Let me assure you, there are places where some of my positions you can attack them, and that's fair. But this one, I think you got no legs to stand on.
Well, when that happens, I change the topic.
Fair.
That's how I've survived so long in radio.
I don't fully answer the question, so you say.
So we're even there.
Yes, sir.
I am going to stay on it 1 second, though, because there's one thing that I really don't like, which is Republicans saying, well, we might wait lame duck session. If Clinton wins, we might vote on him because we might get somebody worse. I mean, to me, that's really playing politics with it. I mean, either you're going to go forward or not.
It shows that this is not a pretty stand. This is,
right.
Raw politics. And again, that's not going to be a shock to any of your listening audience. But at some point, I think the American people have got to say enough. And this is one of those times. There are a lot of gray issues on a lot of issues we deal with. This, to me, is about as clear as anything I've dealt with in the Senate. And again, if my Republican colleagues, hold the hearings and don't find Judge Garland competent or qualified, vote against him. That's their right.
Right. You do make one argument I hadn't considered, which is we've got all these senators up for re-election, and you could basically say we're not going to vote on anything until the people decide, and just put everything off. So I mean, that is a valid argument there. So I'm going to have to think about that.
Let me make sure I got that recorded so I can play it back the next time.
I'm going to think about that. Because it is a very valid argument, because we could take that position and just put everything off. I've only got a minute and a half. I've got final question is on the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership Act. I know the last time we talked, you said it's like 2,500 pages. You were reviewing it. You haven't made a decision on it. If this comes up in 2016, are you up or down, red or black?
I am up for it because there's over 1 million jobs in Virginia that are connected to trade. In many of these countries we trade with already. It is this question of who's going to set the rules for this trade? Are we going to set the rules or China? There is an enormous amount of, I think, anger at trade with China. We have no trading agreement with China other than the WTO. I think this trading agreement is much stronger than NAFTA. It has stronger labor rules. It has stronger environmental rules. It has stronger currency rules. Is it perfect? No. But I believe in the power of trade. I believe that we've got to enforce our trade laws, which sometimes we haven't in the past. But after having reviewed TPP, count me down as a yes.
All right, Senator, I respect your position on it. Don't agree. NAFTA cost the U.S. 850,000 manufacturing jobs, 25,000 manufacturing companies moved out. Right now you've got the Ford Motor Company that you all voted to bail out, setting up a plant in Mexico, 2,800 jobs gone. You've got this air conditioner company in Indianapolis, 1,500 jobs gone. I mean, it's just a sad state. But, Senator,
John,
we're out of time.
I mean, some of those jobs, they went to Mexico on the way to China, and I agree with you on the carrier condition that at some point corporations got to bear a little more responsibility.
Absolutely. And if somebody doesn't stand for the American, I don't know where we are as a nation. Senator, thanks for being with us. I'm really going to think about the argument you presented on Merrick Garland. It's got some merit. You've got me thinking about it. Thank you so much for being with us, sir.